Hello folks, so today we're going to be doing the installation of the LED pattern board, and this is for the PKE meter from MSH Design Studio. I'll have a link in the description. Let's get started. So everything you need for this particular PCB installation, you'll need 9 different colored wires. Actually, there's 7 different colored wires and then 2 black wires. You could also use some other color for those, but these are going to be ground wires. The other ones is very important that you at least keep track of what wires you have and what colors you're using, and we'll talk about that in a minute. You'll need 14 green LEDs, 3mm, and I included 2 extras just in case you need them. You'll need the main screen PCB, it's like that, pretty tiny. You need a 3D printed part for this, included in the files that you bought from Nathan on Etsy, and if you haven't purchased those, the link will be in the description of the video. But this is the main screen part that you need. The 0.3mm solder, tip tinner, which I love to use, your soldering iron, and your helping hands, or whatever you have. So first thing that we want to do, let's see, your PCB will be in a package that looks like that when you get it. Go ahead and take that out, and you'll want to look at inspect the PCB, just make sure the resistors are on there. The right side up, the side that is facing up, will be the side that has the sloping side going down, and I'll give you an example of what that is. When you see that, you want the LEDs to go in that direction. So the 3D printed part looks like that, and you'll want the pattern on the PCB right there. See if you can see this down here. You'll want that direction to go facing up on the PCB. So if this is your shell, you want it to go just like that. And we'll talk about installation of the shell just in a little bit. But for now, you may want to, like, you might be in a hurry to, oh, let's just start putting the LEDs in, but don't do that yet. There's actually something important that you got to do first, and that is connect all of these wires. Otherwise, you won't be able to get to these holes on the bottom once you get this and the LEDs installed. So we're going to do that first, and to do that, we're going to grab our helping hands here. I have been, let's see, I have been putting the wires going from the back of this down because this will connect to your main PCB. Another way you can do it is you can also have these wires connect to a DuPont connector that plugs into the front of your main PCB board, but there's a pretty minimal room for that. So it's not something that you have to do. It's just kind of nice to be able to have that connection that you can unplug and plug back in. But I probably won't be doing that on this particular build. Okay, so we have, we know this is the front because of the way that these LEDs slope down. We're going to flip it over and we're going to do 1 through 7 of these holes right here with different colors. The grounding wires go right here. They're marked ground A and ground B. Those actually will connect to a switch that's used to change the pattern from either this sloping pattern or the diagonal pattern that goes across the front. Alright, so we're going to connect this to our helping hands. Make sure you don't connect it anywhere close to the resistors so you don't accidentally scrub those off. And let's see here. Alright, so we've got all of our colored wires too. And it doesn't really matter which order you do it, but what I typically do is I keep the red and the black furthest away from each other. So if I start with black, then I end with red. If I start with red, then I end with black. So I'm going to start with the red because I know these are the grounding wires and they go somewhere else. So I'm going to start with red. That way I know red's going to be number 1 here. And let's see here. Actually, I need to flip that over. And what I'll do is set it up like this. So hopefully you can see that a little bit better. And I will feed in wire number 1. You're also going to need some kind of nippers like this. Some kind of nippers like that. So you can take the excess wire off. Alright, let's see. Get the tip tenor. I mentioned this in another video, but I swear by this stuff. I used to have to change the tips of my soldering irons all the time. This stuff works great. Can't recommend it more. Alright. And this is probably one of the easier PCBs to install. That doesn't mean it's easy though. It still takes some patience. Still takes some time, and you're gonna want to take your time. You're gonna want to take your time doing it. Don't rush. Alright, so that is red. Let's do orange next. Okay, just work our way down the line here. Get our yellow next. I'll do green next. And these are 30 gauge or 30 AWG, however you want to classify it. wires. And they're silicone wires. Let's see, let me show you. Basically come in a box like this. Looks like that on the front. Has a bunch of different colors. Got a couple of different types, but for the most part, they're silicone instead of just regular insulated plastic. And the reason for that is they're much more flexible. They won't break if you bend them too much, and they're not as stiff either, because of the space that you're working in inside this PKE meter shell. Things get pretty cramped pretty quickly. So you want to make sure you don't put any parts under stress. You want to make sure that you don't put any put parts in place that you'll eventually have to replace because a wire breaks, or just want to make sure that the way that you set this up and you install everything can last a long time, because it is not fun having to deconstruct a prop or deconstruct something just to replace one wire that you got lazy on, or that you didn't do a good job soldering on. Alright, so this is our last wire. This is wire number 7. And again, it doesn't matter the colors, just make sure you keep up with it. This will solder or connect to the main board in the front. And I'll show you what that looks like. I'm going to cut off the excess wire that I have there. But you can see I've got all those connected. And yeah, so I have all this connected now. This is the front, and the wires come off the back, and they're going to go down into the PKE meter, and this will connect to the main board. So let's trim these extra wire off. You always want to do that, because all it takes is 2 of these wires to touch while the pattern is being cycled through for there to be a short. And I have put together a couple of these now, at least 4, and I'm taking them all apart for various issues that I was trying to troubleshoot, or problems that I was running across while I was developing all the code and PCBs. But one of them I put together, and there were a couple of wires that I didn't trim very good, and every time the pattern would go through, it would short out and cut off. It took me a little while to figure it out, but I had to take the whole thing apart and found a couple of wires on the bottom of the main board that I hadn't trimmed. And that was it. That was the problem. Okay, so now we have a very nicely trimmed main board PCB, or main screen PCB. It's really called the LED pattern board, and that's probably the best thing to call it, because you don't want main screen and main board confused. Okay, so we can go ahead and do our side wires too, the grounding wires that go to the switch. You'll see in a minute. I'll go ahead and put both these in. You'll see in a minute why this is important to do the wiring first. I learned this the hard way because thought I was being clever, and I went ahead and did all the LEDs first, and then I realized I can't get to any of these pads to do the soldering now, so to do it in the right order for sure. When you're soldering, whatever soldering iron you're using, I would highly recommend getting the sharpest soldering point you can get. This is just some that I bought off of Amazon, but it was the sharpest soldering iron tips that I could find, and so far they work real well. This is one that I bent a little, so I don't really use that one much anymore, but if I use the tip tinner, that really helps out a lot. All right, so got our side wires now come off the ground points. I'm going to trim those as well. Make sure that there's no like real small wires on there. Just make sure everything's trimmed. Okay, now we are ready to install the LEDs. Now, the thing about this is that you have to have the 3D printed part in between the LED and the pattern board. So it basically will go like this. And then you'll have an LED that sticks to that hole. I'll just give you an example here real quick. So it goes like this. Not quite that much space, but once you do that, you have, so you have, let's see if you can see that. There's a little bit of space between there. Now this, once you get all those LEDs in, it will actually fit from the inside into the PKE meter this way. I'm not going to go ahead and push that in there, but it fits it in there just like that, and then your green acrylic screen will fit over the top there. So what we have to do here is, oh, and one more thing. These LEDs have, you'll hear me on every video comment about this. One of the leads is long and one is short. Very important. The long one is the positive, the short one is the negative. On the PCB, you can see here, each hole has is labeled B and A. So that's pattern B, pattern A. And each hole is marked either with a number and a positive sign or a number and a negative sign. So this is one, first one is 1 positive, 1 negative, 2 positive, 2 negative. So we want to make sure that we've got these going in the right way. So the long lead will go in the positive, short lead will go in the negative. And we want to start installing these, make sure we're doing it the right way. Make sure we have the pattern. And the first prototype that I did of this PCB actually didn't have any numbers on the back, and that was pretty frustrating because you couldn't see what numbers or what the positive was and what the negative was. You'll notice on these LEDs, I'll see if I can point it out here. there's a section, I think you can see it right in there. That's about where you want the PCB to be. You want to put the PCB up around that section where the wires get kind of flat. That seems to work real well. We're just going to keep feeding these in. Keep double checking, make sure that you've got the positive going in the right one and the negative going in the right one. Very, very, very important, or this thing will not work. I would also recommend doing one pattern at a time. You can see the pattern labels on the back. Do B first and then A second. Or you can do A first, I guess, but I usually do B first because that's kind of that's the pattern that I like the best. But the leads are actually flipped, so the positive goes in a different way for pattern B. Once we get all of these LEDs in place, what we'll do is we'll test them before we start soldering. Yeah, this is one of the more basic installations, but it's still tedious and it's still time consuming. I should have put my notifications on mute because that's pretty annoying. I apologize. All right. So there we go. Got all those LEDs in place. You want to make sure that they're spaced out, the right way. Make sure that they're all the way touching the 3D printed part. Yeah, looks pretty good. Yeah, so then on the back, you can see all the leads here. You do want to make sure the wires aren't touching, the leads aren't touching, because when we start to test these, you'll burn one out, and then you'll have to replace it, which is why I gave you extra ones in case something like that happens. I did just notice I have a wire, stray wire on my grounds. All right, we're going to work on the second pattern now. Remember I mentioned that the leads are actually flipped the other direction for this one. I like that you can see the holes for this individual LEDs through that. It took me a while to try to get those lined up perfectly, but worked out nice. Long lead goes to the positive, short lead goes through the negative. Right there in the middle where there's all those LEDs that are kind of bunched up, that's kind of the more difficult area to be working. But if you've got small hands or large fingers, I don't know why I was going to say that, but that may be a tough area to do your installation. Anyway, I guess you could use tweezers if you needed to, but that'd be kind of tough to do this whole thing with tweezers. Green. Hopefully you got all the way through this without having to use any of the extra LEDs. If you did, congratulations, you're the proud owner of 2 useless 3mm green LEDs. If you'll be able to use them on anything, but good luck with them. Okay, so I think we've got all of them in place. Everything, you want to double check, make sure that none of the wires are touching. And make sure you got all the leads in the right way. Looks like everything's good to go. So that's what we have. We've got both patterns, we've got all of our wires. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to connect this to our helping hands, and we're going to test out our patterns. Yeah, we're going to test all the LEDs, but before I do that, I've got to strip the ends off of the wires here. you don't have to worry about doing, you know, such a great job stripping these right now. You're going to end up trimming these much shorter once you get to the part where you install this into the main board. The way that I'm going to test this, I've got a 18650 lithium ion battery. This is just a little battery holder. You got your positive and you got your negative. We're going to connect this to one of the negatives. And let's see. Start with the red. So we know that is our very first one. So you should be able to, whoop, wait a minute. That's wrong. I don't know why I did that. Make sure you go negative to negative. Must be tired or something. I don't know why I did that. All right. Connected negative to negative, and we're going to start with a red wire. You should see an LED light up. You don't have to touch it very long, just to verify that that's lit. Let's see, orange is our next one. Yep, that one works. Yellow, all right, and then green. Yep. And then let's see, kind of this bluish purple color. All right. White. So this would be number 6 and number 7. Great. So those all work. We're going to change to the other pattern, and when you get this installed in your PKE meter, these two grounding wires connect to your switch, so you can switch back and forth between the patterns. We're going to go right down the line again, starting with the red. Okay, that one works. And orange is next. Okay. And yellow. Okay. And then we have green. Great. Then we have this purple color. That one works. White. And then the gray one. Great. So they all work. All right, go ahead and disconnect your battery. Put that aside. Now we're ready for the very last step, which is soldering all of these leads. Now, I mentioned this before. You want to just make sure you go very methodically. Don't miss one. These are very, very tiny pads. So again, use the sharpest soldering tip you can find. Take your time. Make sure that all of the bottoms of the LEDs are flush with the 3D printed part right through here. So you want to make sure that everything is, the pattern looks good, because that's basically what it's going to look like when it starts lighting up. Make sure there's no LEDs that are kind of bent the wrong way. All right, we're going to, at this part, I usually clip the helping hands to the 3D printed part instead of the PCB. And it doesn't really matter which order you go in. Really, the only thing that matters is making sure that you are methodical and you get all of them done. All right, so let's start with another thing. Make sure that you don't have any shorts. So if you soldered any of those pads and there's solder linking between the two, that LED is not going to light up. So make sure that you can see that blue PCB between those two wires, otherwise you're in a lot of trouble and you're going to have to redo that. You don't want to use too much solder because for that very reason, you don't want excess solder all over the place. You run into that problem, then you're gonna have some shorts and you're gonna be hating life. Okay. Make sure you move this around too. And it's the whole point of having it on the helping hands is to move it around. Position it so you can get to everything. I usually try to get the solder kind of like between where the soldering iron is touching the, well, didn't do such a good job that time. I usually try to get the solder right between where the soldering iron is touching the wire. Just like minimal. Oof. If you get the solder just right, it'll fall right into those holes. Be very careful not to accidentally bump any of those resistors either. Yeah, the other thing is that there's so many leads on here, you may have to clip some to get to the other. Yeah, that's probably what I'm gonna have to do here. It looks like one of the LEDs fell out anyway, so what I'll do is I'll clip the ones that I've done already just to move those out of the way so I can get to the other ones. Don't clip leads that you haven't done yet, because that would, you'd have to feed another LED through, and that wouldn't, I mean, I guess it's fine, but you want to make sure you do this right the first time. Looks like I need a little bit more solder on that one. I'm going to go ahead and do this particular LED right here. It keeps slipping out. So I'll put it right there. Tip tenor. curious to find out if any of you guys figure out a better kind of more methodical way of doing this particular piece. If you do, leave some messages in the comments here. Be very curious to hear how your installation goes, what you think about it, what you think about the PCB at least, and anything that you want to see changed or improved on. Certainly take that into account. I mentioned this on several of the other videos, but yeah, if this is your first soldering project, it is not for the faint of heart. This is not beginner soldering by any means. It's very small parts, and I have very unsteady hands, but I've done several of these, so I've gotten pretty good at it. But if you're a beginner solderer or haven't ever really done electronics before, boy, are you in for something, because it's pretty tricky. It's just very tedious, really, but some of the parts are just very small. Really, the main board has a lot more parts to it, but I feel like the soldering goes like much easier on that because it's not so small. This is definitely one of the more challenging ones, just because everything's so tight. I think this may be, nope, I got a couple more. All right. Let's check out what we got here. Make sure we got all of our pads soldered here. Looks like we do. You can kind of wiggle them. See if they move at all in the PCB. It looks like they're all good. All right, and oh yeah, one tip is don't let the 3D printed part get too hot or it will melt. Doesn't really matter a whole lot, but you want all of those LEDs to be very flush with that, because this 3D printed part is what's stopping the LEDs from slipping out the front, and you gotta have room for that acrylic green screen part to fit on top of the LEDs, and this plastic part is really what's stopping it from touching that acrylic part. All right, so we're going to clip off all of the leads now. Okay. And just kind of go back through and trim these up a little bit. That looks pretty good. All right. So we're done with our pattern board. I do want to kind of show you what you need to do in case you get halfway through your pattern board build and you've noticed that one of the LEDs are out, or what can happen sometimes is if you have your soldering iron on the LED too long when you're soldering onto the board, you can actually burn it out. So I'm going to show you how to replace that and then test the board again. Okay, so we discovered that one of our LEDs isn't functioning. The way we figured that out is we connected the ground to our test battery, and we went through each pattern, connecting each wire to the positive, and eventually found one that didn't work. And in this case, it's LED number 6. So what we're going to do, you're going to need needle-nose pliers, and you're probably going to need a sucker, solder sucker. You just melt the solder, push that down, and then push the button. You may not need that, but just in case. So you're going to grab the LED leads from the side here. Make sure you've got the whole board in your helping hands, and make sure it's in there really secure. I'm just going to melt that solder and see if we can just pull this LED right out. Make sure you don't touch any of the other LEDs or resistors. The resistors are really, really small, so just be mindful of those. There we go. Got the LED out. Got my solder sucker here. I am gonna have a swig of this real quick. Liquid Death. I really like their marketing campaigns. Maybe they'll be a sponsor. Not kidding. I mean, I'm kidding. Okay. Got my solder sucker. What we want to do, we're going to, let's just position this first. Now, if you've never used one of these, you push this down and you're going to want to heat up the solder. You're going to heat this up, and then you're going to put the tip of this right where you heated up the solder, make sure it's melted, and then press that button. And eventually it'll get most of it. There's a lot of suction on that. I've used it quite a few times for things like this. Small repairs. Alright. So you want to melt that solder. And it's going to take a few times to get all of it, but yep, pretty good. Okay, so I can see through there now. All right, we're gonna feed our LED through, so I can see all the way through that now, which is great. There, good as new. Before we start soldering again, let's test it just to make sure that it's not something else, some other problem that we haven't seen. Okay. Let's see. All right. Well, that's weird. Both of those were lighting up at the same time. How was that happening? Oh, that's why. Make sure the leads aren't touching on the back. Those two were touching. Yep, so that's the one that we just replaced. It's all good. That means that we are good to go. We're just going to solder that. You got a lot more room now, since you just replaced the one. We'll put that right there. Okay, let's check one more time. One more time. So this is pattern A. Get our battery one more time. All right. Go through all of the lights just to be sure. All right. All right, cool. So we've replaced the LED and they all work now. So now we have our working main screen PCB, and we're going to clip those leads off. Cool. Now the next step would be you're going to get your shell, and you remember we're going to feed that in through the back, and it should seat in there pretty easily. You may have to, depending on what you 3D printed your holder in out of, you might have to kind of seat it in there a little wonky, but yep, there you go. That's what it looks like. And then your acrylic screen is going to go over that. Now you have all these wires in the back. These are going to go to your main screen LED. I usually loop them around the front that way and then down. And then your your ground wires are going to go to the switch that goes right in here in the center. That'd be this switch right there that changes the patterns. I think that's it though. If you have any questions, any comments, any criticisms, that's welcome as well. Feel free to write them in the comments. Yep, we'll see you later.